meet my bride. Let's go for a ride in my newfangled automobile. Just where we will go, nobody knows, but it's sure a great way to feel. Behind the wheel of the speed meter steel, it's my newfangled automobile. Hello and welcome to Vintage Car History. I'm Wild Bill. I remember being taught in high school that during World Wars I and II, the nations involved didn't make cars, and thinking, man, that would suck, not being able to buy a new car. But I also thought, oh, wait a minute. We've also done Korea and Vietnam, and we made cars during those wars. Why would a country stop making cars for some wars and not for others? Let's take a look. We're going to focus on World War I, as this is vintage car history, but we can apply what we discuss here to any other war in the 20th and 21st century, so we're good. Otto von Bismarck left the German Chancellery in 1890, leaving Kaiser Wilhelm II pretty much a loose cannon. The Kaiser wanted to grow Germany's military strength and also become a colonial power, and the rest of Europe spent the next couple of decades keeping a watchful eye on Germany. Wilhelm was not the master statesman that Bismarck was, and many of the relationships that Otto had built with other European nations deteriorated. By the time you reached 1912, most folks were expecting a war to break out at some point. Many European nations began to prepare for the inevitable while maintaining a peacetime, though an uneasy peace, economy. Most European countries increased their military recruiting, stockpiles, and expenditures while still trying to hide much of their doings to help keep the peace. Now, to what extent a nation can prepare for war without actually being at war depends on the type of government and the provisions for war within said government. And these will depend on what I call the freedom scale. Every nation will experience freedom. That freedom will be either in the hands of the people, the hands of the government, or somewhere in between. On the right, we have anarchy, utter freedom, and no government. On the left is absolute dictatorship. One man rules over every aspect of all citizens, the ultimate in order. A score of 1 is anarchy, 10 is one rules all. Obviously, anarchy doesn't work, and when it happens, it usually quickly becomes a dictatorship of some kind. North Korea is a great example of the closest thing we have today of an absolute dictatorship. In 1912, countries like Germany, the Ottoman Empire, and Russia were most likely about 8 on the scale, all being autocracies, while nations like France, Britain, and the US were probably closer to 5. So the various empires were able to invest more in pre-war preparation than their more republicly oriented counterparts, though they still made cars. Now, when war did break out in 1914, things changed. With armies and navies and even fledgling air forces now about to duke it out, 2 questions had to be answered by each combatant as quickly as possible. Where will this be fought, and what is it gonna cost? The answers to these questions will determine whether the nation now at war will declare total war and thus enter a full wartime economy. Now, the term total war is fairly new, dating to the 1930s, but the concept is just about as old as warfare itself. There have been many wars throughout history where one or more of the belligerents attacked all targets, be they military or civilian. Moses talked about one such war in Deuteronomy 2, 31 through 35, where the Israelites destroyed King Sihon and his army and all of the people of his cities down to every man, woman, and child. Then they looted the place for valuables and livestock. And after the first engagement or two, where the war will be fought can be reasonably determined. And if it will be fought on your land and your cities and resources will be directly at risk, then you have good reason to declare total war and get everybody involved in their defense, whether they wear a uniform or not. Thus, the nation would rally its whole population into what was coined the war effort. Now, if the answer to the where are we going to fight question is somewhere that at that time does not threaten your general population and resources, then the second question, how much is this going to cost, comes into play. Two obvious sides to this cost, personnel and materials. How much of both the nation has stockpiled will be a factor, but if the military bean counters determine that one, the other, or both will be lacking, then total war may be justified by the government to rally the people. World War I and the wars since then are the only wars of history where many nations involved had their own automotive industries. Yet not all wars caused cars to stop production. Many times, such as the U.S. in Korea and Vietnam, total war was not declared, though in Vietnam the shortage of personnel was a different issue, and so car production continued as normal. Of course, you also have countries like North Korea that have maintained a total war economy since the 1940s and still don't make cars for their public. But by the beginning of World War I, cars were well integrated into most modern militaries, both in motor pools and as armored versions. Thus, cars had become a strategic supply. And in total war, the government controls such supplies and typically directs them to the military. So actually, most car makers do make some cars during total war, just not for civilian purchase. And the cars that they made and the cars that preceded them are the topic of many videos to come. Thanks for watching Vintage Car History, and we'll see you next week.